Welcome back to the newly branded and highly anticipated Refuel Podcast with Historics Auctioneers. This is your VIP pass to the thrilling world of all things four wheels. Join us for a spirited ride through the classic cars, modern marvels and the stories that fuel our passion. In each episode we go beyond the engines and into the personal experience of our celebrity guests. Today I'm joined by Tim Pollard, Group Digital Editor, very posh, of Bauer Media's Automotive Division, and Historics' new auctioneer, Dan Godin, and we're going to do a bit of trend forecasting, so stick around, you're in for a treat.
Buying or selling a classic car? Head to historics.co.uk or click below for a free valuation.
Welcome back, it's 2024 and it's Baltically cold, -5 degrees here at the Historics HQ. Sorry Tim. Now, before we get started, please do hit subscribe. It literally takes 2 seconds and it's extremely easy to do. There will be a button somewhere down here, so please do click it. Now, if you're listening, then please do leave us a review. And if you do enjoy listening to our podcast, it really helps us and it allows me to bring you fabulous guests just like Tim. Now then, good morning, Tim.
Hello, and thank you for having me on today.
You're welcome. Sorry it is so cold.
We'll survive.
Yeah, we will.
It is cold today, middle of winter, but hey, keeping us on our toes.
So before we get started, what I wanted to do is have a quick brief overview from yourself on how the digital world, social media, has impacted journalism and changed the way in which we sort of engage and work with our car journalists in the modern sphere. How is that working for us at the moment?
Well, it's a fascinating time, isn't it? Because I mean, I started my career in journalism in the late 90s, and obviously none of these social media platforms existed, and now they're prevalent, they're everywhere, aren't they?
They are.
It has changed it. So rewind. When I started out, my first job was on a local newspaper. Then I worked my way up into my first job in motoring on a local paper. Then I worked onto a fleet and company car magazine, and eventually landed at Autocar, which was the job of my dreams.
Yes.
And there was a weekly magazine. There was no website even when I arrived, or not really much of one other than a very early rudimentary one. So it has totally revolutionised the media landscape, hasn't it? And I think nowadays the choice out there is extraordinary. The sort of the ivory tower which the publishers used to have, that controlled, controlled to the audience, the route to market, has just been shattered. And so in many ways, it's a much more democratic landscape, because you or I, anyone can go and set up a website, anyone can launch a magazine with digital printing, anyone can launch a
blog.
YouTube channel, blogs. The choice is enormous. So it's made it
information out there, a lot of opinions,
and a lot of competition. So it's changed hugely. However, don't forget, we're also harnessing all of these new channels as well. So, the YouTube, the route to market for video, the social media channels. So hugely different, but an opportunity for us.
Yeah. No, equally, it's like you, I started out in local newspapers, and I, remember that ability that it was controlled. We controlled the local community, and what you wrote or what you published was what the local community engaged with. They didn't have anything else to really pull them in other than 4 channels of TV, of course. And it is amazing how now you get fed things. You're on any kind of social media channel or similar. You've got stories almost being pushed towards you rather than you having to go and find them or reading a specific.
Well, exactly. And it's a lot of noise, isn't it? And I think it's only going to get worse with the arrival of mainstream AI, ChatGPT, some of the robo-generated, generative AI is already changing the search landscape. So many websites.
Are you seeing any of that in journalism where people are starting to use that in greater ways?
Absolutely. People are being caught out by it, aren't there? There's been a big publisher in America who was caught having fake author profiles. So it's already out there. I think in the UK, I think the big publishers are being probably more cautious. Everyone's looking at it. I think some people will be using it already. But I suppose I'm interested in the plurality of choice. It's noisy. How do people, if you're into cars, how do you know what to trust? Where do you go? And I think that's where we hope that Bauer Media, so the brands I work with, Car Magazine, Parkers, and brands like that. We have Classic Cars, Practical Classics, Classic Car Weekly, a lot of traditional legacy media brands. We're on there. Car Magazine's got over 1 million followers on Facebook, so we're using it as another route to market. And I suppose my personal view, boiling it down, distilling it to the basics, is that I think really we need to concentrate on quality.
Yes.
We all probably know there's a lot of stuff out there. It doesn't mean it's good. So I think we're needing to double down on editorial quality.
I suppose with your name as well, you've been around in the game for a long time.
Do you mean Car Magazine or Tim Pollard?
Car Magazine, yeah.
Right, okay.
So, I'm talking about the magazine, but
totally,
that definitely helps.
Well, and that's where we must boost and cling and improve, and really make a play on our quality. Because Car Magazine's been around for 62 years it will be this year. We had our 60th anniversary in 2022. We were launched in 1962. So there's a huge, I always think that's a great responsibility, actually, to keep brands like that, keep them honest. They have to adapt, but I think storytelling can move with the times. As, our YouTube channel's just passed 100,000 subscribers. We're really pleased with that. We're a little bit slower into the YouTube space, but, we're kind of growing in most channels, and it's really part of what we need to do.
There you go. Right, now we know a little bit more about you two. Let's see about design cycles and how the contemporary design influences the perception and values of classic cars. So are there any specific designs that you think have really stood the test of time that perhaps you remember when they were new? Not to date you,
well,
be careful.
In the sort of modern era, I think car design is a fascinating topic. It sort of goes through waves, and I think if you think back to the late 90s, noughties, we went through a real sort of retro sort of looking back phase. Actually, probably in the 90s, maybe with that millennium dawning, cars like the Audi TT, famously Bauhaus influenced look, and particularly the German brands, actually.
Minis, the Fiat 500s all went completely that way.
Volkswagen Beetle, that was launched with that sort of flower holder on the dashboard. Very quite kitsch, but very, very looking back. And I think actually what's happened in the last 2 decades, since then, actually there's a much more, we've got electrification coming in, reinventing the car, this huge transformation which is sweeping through every manufacturer practically. And I think now we're getting much more forward-looking, progressive designs. And I find it fascinating. Do you look back? Do you look forwards? And I think good designers generally want to look forwards, but they go through some no man's land where they're not quite sure what they're doing.
Because we're all influenced by something. And I said this the other day about, so a lot of more modern cars are almost reflecting 80s designs, but not directly. I.e., do you remember when we had things that were much more monosyllabic and fins and futuristic? And that was sort of really through a lot of 80s culture, where we were, Back to the Future, and everything was talking about space. And we had all these very sort of futuristic-looking cars. And now, of course, one of the ones I thought was fantastic, and out of the blue was the Hyundai Ioniq?
Ioniq 5,
Which is, you look at it and you think, well, that's literally come from a movie. That's mad. How is that driving around?
They're one of the brands. I think the Koreans are the ones who are doing the best work at the moment. They are carving their own niche, aren't they? They're not following somebody else. They're not doing it's a little bit retro because the pixel motif on the lights, and they actually will reference that about how the pixel's really, really the point of that car.
But we've always referenced that in the classic car sphere because obviously it works generationally, and of course, so the 80s generation, if you put that relative to their age group, they're very much the buyers, the spenders at the moment for classic cars and probably for modern cars as well. So you're teeing into that sort of childhood memories of what you used to like, And I did say, well, when are we going to start seeing like slatted fins like we did on Testarossas? Because
only a matter of time, isn't it?
we all thought about it.
I think that if you think about the technology underpinning the electric cars, really, it's almost, we could be about to enter a period where you return to the coach builder, really, where you just get a skateboard platform, whatever you put on top. Now, my take on it is that we're in this sort of, it is a transformation. It's huge. We're seeing, if anything, actually possibly duller cars. I think we're sort of constrained, and there's constrained choice. The city car, the Ford Fiesta being killed. That's a crying shame. My son's 17, just learning to drive, and it's like, we're okay because we can still get those cars. But in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, what will people learn to drive in? And I think at the moment they're sort of trimming model lines. So the Audi TT we've just mentioned is being euthanized right now.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's going.
Well, that's a top tip for classics then.
And the Audi R8, an early TT is absolutely lovely, isn't it?
With that original design.
And you can get them for a couple of grand. I mean, one of the early ones if it's not been molested. But we're seeing constricted choice while they just focus on getting the big selling volumes. Sadly, a lot of crossovers and SUVs. And I think once we're through this period, I think we will get. I see
the other end, maybe.
We're bound to be. Human nature wants interesting design.
Yeah. Well, I spoke to a friend very early on in the sort of Tesla generation, and he went out and he said, bought a Tesla. He said he was walking around Westfield where they had that pop-up showroom, and he said, and the wife was shopping, so I thought I'd wander in there. He said, I came out with an order form. I said, I'm not sure why. I'm a real petrol head. I've got V8s, V6s, and suddenly I've got this Tesla on order because it seemed like a tax-efficient way of doing it. It arrived early, which he was gutted about. He didn't really want it. He said, but I drove it, and it's amazing but efficient. And that brings on to the point that you said about coach building cars, because I thought initially when they sort of thought, batteries are on the floor, cars of this ilk don't need to be as dynamic. We're talking about cars that could end up being on motorways with, it's self-driving. It doesn't need to be dynamic. It just needs to be comfortable, really, because you're going to be sat there with it doing it all for you. So why wouldn't you put all the batteries on the floor and be able to coach, build and change, much as they do still with buses and things like that. So it's only then when they started the sort of, I'd say, the manufacturer fight became, everyone has to get the best electric car to sell them again. They start putting batteries into parts of the chassis. You start thinking, we're now into a different ball game again, because we're now going into trying to make the very best driver's electric car.
I think design is possibly stuck in a bit of a rut, because should be a clean sheet moment. And actually, most of these electric cars look, maybe give or take a Hyundai Ioniq 5, look remarkably like the cars that have gone before. Yes. So a lot of enthusiasts, we at Car Magazine, are sort of just waiting. We're wanting to champion the next big thing, and for a breakthrough company to come along. Not sure we've seen it yet.
Well, love it or hate it, everyone talked about the Cybertruck because it was just
something different,
something very, very different.
Very different.
And I say it is a love it or hate it. It made great press, great stories, especially when
there was that great video.
Smashing the window.
Well, no, the Porsche 911, towing the Porsche 911 and beating
the Porsche 911.
Porsche 911 that was
extraordinary. I saw it when I was over in Los Angeles last year and saw it. There's an amazing exhibition. I don't know if it's still on at the moment. It may have come to an end, but at the Peterson Museum, one of the world's great car museums. You should definitely go if you're in California. And they had a Cybertruck there, and it's the first time I've seen it. Oh my goodness! Yeah. It dwarfs an F-150. It's absolutely enormous, and it's listed. Presence. It's now listed. I think in the last couple of weeks I've seen it go onto the Tesla GB website. You can now order one over here, or put an expression of interest down anyway. And that's mind-boggling. Can you imagine that barreling down?
Well, they're like you say, they're the first people that have sort of taken the standard electric cars that look like the usual sort of cars that we drive around in, and made it something a little bit different, a little bit more modern.
The irony, when the first Tesla Model S came out, is everyone thought it was a premium car, and I actually now, sorry if you're in a Tesla, close your ears, I just think it was a Ford Mondeo. They're everywhere because they are, and actually very bland in their design.
They are quite, it's the most conservative part of it.
Very conservative. Interior, design was...
Well, I don't know. What's your take on that? What are they going to be like in the classic spec? Will the early ones? Tesla Roadster, I suppose, the very first one.
Yeah, the Roadster's already worth money.
They've already gone up in value. But the standard cars, I think they were, like you say, they were sort of built to be a standard car. Everyone has one. They're the new way. They're electric way, and they're nothing special. But
they're too popular.
Everyone sort of has one.
You say that, but I mean, we're almost wanting for something to come along and dislodge it. But we've just done a group test with a Tesla Model 3, the sort of the high volume, big selling one. And it still keeps winning. It's won every group test that Car Magazine's put it into.
Is it?
The battery tech, the ease of the supercharger network, and the actual just the way it performs as an electric car is still very, very clever. So he does have a little secret sauce.
I think he stole the march ultimately, didn't he? He stole the march.
But the other manufacturers are they're very much catching up. But at the moment, it's still very compelling. And they've cut the prices.
Mercedes, BMW, all of the big Volkswagen groups, they were all hedging bets on different modes. They were looking at hydrogen. They were looking at all of them without pinning one particular, pony to the tail to the pony, they say. But they didn't actually pick one. Elon Musk had only one way to go, went that way, and stole probably near a decade on some of the sort of the march with these electric cars. The interesting will be about the Chinese cars and whether they really come in.
Happening. It is happening now. I mean, if you look at MG, we've got to remember, obviously, MG is now Chinese-owned. One of the fastest-growing brands, in fact, the fastest-growing brand in the UK, I believe. They sold last year. The numbers are just in recently. They sold twice as many cars as Renault.
Drove past
in the UK, would you believe?
Drove past one of their SUVs the other day. It looked like a Mercedes GLC, and didn't look as it did 6-7 years ago. You think, MG, but it's starting to look a little bit.
So MG is a name where your listeners will be and viewers.
It
will
resonates
be
with the original.
But BYD, build your dreams.
Sure.
BYD, they are one to watch. They are coming at scale.
At pace, haven't they overtook
Great
Tesla?
Wall Motor, GWM, the Funky Cat. Some extraordinary names coming out.
So do we think that these? I think it comes down to design rather than tech when it comes to them becoming classics. Whereas we're used to, for instance, with the modern classics, we always see this because cars suddenly became built in greater numbers. So then you had the likes of Ferrari and the top marks. Obviously what they would do is they would build at base model, which was popular enough, and then they would finite into these very small margins when it goes up into a 1 of 5, and that would then become the pinnacle of the classic market when they became more collectible. But with these electric cars, this is always going to be the thing about whether they ever become collectible, is because there's much fewer, I'd say, sports derived, it seems to still be in the sphere of the likes of McLaren using battery tech, but alongside combustion engines.
That are still electric cars. They're basically more for comfort.
They are built for that,
use, as opposed to.
I haven't seen many that
I think it's going to come full circle.
But I think you're right. It will. They will once they sort of get their head around it and start.
5-10 years or so, because once they've got their mainstream, I really pity them. They've got to they're in this phase where they're having to build combustion cars or hybrids and electric cars. It's the sort of switch over, and I think once we've got to the point where actually the predominant chunk of their range is electric, they will start. A brand like BMW, look at what they've done. You look at that i3. That was a pioneering car. That's almost.
People are still buying them now because they still look.
They're really clever.
Futuristic.
They're really clever and just technically interesting for people like us, and they're also great to drive. Whereas some of the, and maybe they stopped doing that and did some rather blander cars. But a brand like BMW will come full circle. Imagine something like a Z1, reinterpreted as an electric car in the next few years. I'm very confident it'll happen, but we're going through this period of a bit gloopy sort of, I'm not, there's a lot of cars and actually think, is this better than what we had 5-10 years ago?
Perhaps it's still a bit of nostalgia and holding on to the combustion engine, isn't it?
But if I may, one of the bits that really annoys me is actually inside the cars, all the digital touch points and what have you. And I get in so many cars and go, this is not progress, guys.
No,
this is not progress.
My daily has driven me mad for a year because if I have to press a button, I have to look for the button. That's a backward step. We knew, don't get me wrong, you have the old Japanese cars with 40,000 buttons in there, but generally speaking, you'd know where your buttons were in the car, and without really taking your eyes off the road, you could hit play on something, or you could turn your fans up, or something similar. The problem with screens is you have to look to find the button because there's no definition of that button.
You have to prop your hand up on the edge of the screen to get
the
purchase.
I'm sure that's just because, let's be honest, we usually be talking to the cars soon enough and it will just do it all for us. But you're right, that's almost technology for technology's sake.
They've ruined many a recent car, I think. And I think they are beginning to understand that Volkswagen has been lambasted for getting this wrong in in most of its mainstream cars. And I've been driving a Volkswagen ID Buzz, really interesting design. That's the people carrier, sort of electric people carrier that's just launched. And it's brilliant in many ways. It's a really good electric car, huge for family space. I've got a golden retriever at home, getting all with family in, it's brilliant. But it's just let down by this terrible touchscreen. And it's got these capacitive buttons on the steering wheel. So it's not even physical buttons. They change their function and they light up. And it's really weird. They're a step back from what just good old-fashioned buttons are.
Is that a new released car? Or
yes. Yeah, it's kind of brand new in the last 6 months.
I think, coming back to your point there, I think in this area where perhaps designers got a little bit lulled because they're chasing technology, it might be the interiors that become something that almost in years to come sets one car away from another. Think of the old Citroens and crazy designs we had with DSs and some of the aspects of those French designers back in the 70s, 60s, even 80s that would set people apart thinking, that's different, that's amazing.
That's where I think there's a fine line between interesting design and gimmicks as well, because, the GWM Funky Cat, the Great Wall Motor Funky Cat, one of the Chinese electric cars which you can buy today. It's been on sale for about 6 to 12 months, I think, in the UK. It's got sort of, instead of a door bin down here, it's got sort of, there's an area there, but instead of a sort of side on it of a binnacle, it's got sort of guitar strings, which they're elastic, basically. It's like elastic, and you can actually play a tune on it. You can play, so they've actually tuned them, and that's it's quite that's quite interesting. Actually, I don't mind that, but a bit of a gimmick, isn't it? And I think that's where clever design aces it. And will stand the test of time, and you won't turn around in 5 years and go, that's a bit embarrassing.
You want clever design that's innovative, not just for the sake of a story.
And that's where it's only really with the passage of time, as you guys well know, because you trade in it day to day. That's what makes classic cars or modern. That's what makes we appreciate it, because actually that was a perfect. Perfect.
So on that vein, so sort of culture of 2023, 2024. Do you feel the culture is really informing people's decisions on purchasing cars? So how we live our lives has, because of these electric cars and the way, is that really...
I think it is. When we talk about the proliferation of digital touch points, and actually we're sitting here slightly berating it, when it's done well, it can work. And I think, when you think about culture, we are surrounded by screens all day long. Part of the reason why I don't want a screen in my car, actually, because I spend most of my time in front of a laptop. We're watching something at television. You've got your smartphone or an iPad and what have you. But so I think the digitisation is absolutely one of the key. Lots of brands getting it wrong at the moment. They will learn from that because it should be seamless. And I think that's one of the big differentiators now. If people walk into a showroom and they can't hear a noise of a car or go, I want a 2 litre, not the 1.6. You know, that's all going with electrification. So I think the way that the car syncs with your digital life, you know, aka your smartphone or whatever your digital life is, wherever it sits in the cloud or in your pocket, that is a big frontier, and they're spending so much money on this, getting the apps and and actually, listen, some of it's brilliant. The fact that I can on a morning like this, you know, from upstairs, tap a button and defrost my car. Happy days. That's the kind of progress I approve.
So we think so technology is really what's in this sort of, I'd say, in our modern culture, technology drives everything. It's really starting to drive the way that cars are. Because obviously we grew up in an era where cars were aspirational. And it was about noise and speed, and there's no point to speed realistically in an electric car because they're too fast already.
They're almost
get in a Model S Tesla and put it on ludicrous mode. It's too fast. You can't use
humble
that.
Ones, even quite humble normal ones. I mean, the ID Buzz is probably one of the slowest electric cars I've ever driven, and it's just I'd call it ample. It's fine for a vehicle of that type, but even quite mundane cheap electric cars are really quick.
Yeah, because there's that instant torque. So, and let's be honest, most of what we drive is more about instant torque than it is about high-end speed because we can't physically really use that. So
it's the MX-5 argument, isn't it? I think we will get to a point very quickly, I think, or reasonably quickly, where the old-fashioned metrics of what makes a good car to drive, you know, the response, the fact it steers nicely, you know, a lot of electric cars, you know, the BMW i3 I mentioned, I lived with one for a year, absolutely loved it. It felt like a BMW, and I think when you think of the best, I suppose the brands which I think of who utterly know how to give a good driving experience. BMW famously, you know, the ultimate driving machine. Porsche, I love the fact that you can get into any Porsche and the controls feel the same, even in a Taycan, even in the electric one. They've somehow made the pedals.
Porsche do little T. So I got into a Macan and I said, well, it's got all these options. Why has it not got keyless entry? And the answer was because we still want people to get into a car, put a key in and turn it. And even if you opt for their rather expensive keyless entry, there is in effect, a fake key in a barrel. And
the key's in the shape of the car, isn't it?
Yeah. So you still have to get in and turn a key because they still want that soul
sort of
They're about to show, I think, in fact, next week, they're about to show, so by the time this comes out, around about now, they're showing the new Macan.
Yes.
I suspect might be a bit more.
It's all electric, and so interestingly, because I have one, is that apparently the residuals are holding very well on the current Macan because the reason everyone bought that was because it was that
the last of the
sports car SUV. So the moment it goes from sports car SUV to electric SUV, it really does drop into the grasps, I suppose, of all of the other premium manufacturers, and ultimately then becomes, well, what's your differential? What's the difference between the Porsche and a Mercedes? What's the difference? Because it always used to be about the soul, the engine, the fact that it is still a Porsche.
They will argue, and we've driven it, not myself personally. I think Ben Miller, the editor of Car Magazine, has driven a prototype of it and reports it's still very much a Porsche.
Yeah, they said driving-wise is amazing.
Yeah.
It's
but
just
you're right, the noise, and that's fascinating. It's going to come back to us again and again. For me, it's anathema to hear, you know, pipes, fake engine oil. I think it's bonkers. And like the Abarth 500, so the Go Faster Fiat 500. One drove past me in Cambridge. I was visiting my mother the other day. One drove past me. I couldn't believe it. It had like a fake petrol engine noise coming out. It was embarrassing.
Like that happened. I mean, Audi did that with a diesel. You had a diesel that made a petrol exhaust note on it.
Interesting. Well, I think it's a very confused time. I think the manufacturers are quite confused. I think punters, you know, I think old-fashioned enthusiasts, or people who, you know, some people, they fall into various camps, don't they? People who just want to stay with, you know, I don't know if this is all rubbish, I want to stick with my petrol. You know,
they're trying to sort of bridge the gap, but it doesn't.
Most people are probably somewhere in the middle. They're not quite sure. They'll have a go. They might love it. They might hate it. I think most people who go into an electric car, it's a bit of a one-way gate. I think not many people come out. You do hear of people.
No, not many.
But I think most people probably have a multi-car garage.
Yeah, the major argument appears to be sort of more about hybrid over full electric, and whether you want to plug it in or whether you want a bit of both at the moment. And that's that safe ground in between, which suits manufacturers because it means they can sell something in the meantime as well. So.
And, you know, don't forget, this year there's the new ZEV, zero emissions vehicle mandate. So 22% of cars sold this year must be electric. Wow. That's sort of slightly. I'm not sure most people realise that, and that's huge. So we are, you know, legislation, looking at the wider culture, what's happening in the world. it's coming, folks.
I mean, to me, it makes a lot of sense in a lot of commercial vehicles. It makes much more sense from an environmental issue. But the problem, of course, with the commercial vehicles is they need that much more power, so therefore it becomes more difficult. Because ultimately, if you walk around London, the biggest inconvenience is buses, any lorries. They're the ones that really benefit from it, but ideally they're the ones that don't really work in that area yet. But that's all down to batteries. And let's be honest, Elon Musk will take over the world before then, so he'll be decreeing what to do from Mars. So, forecasting.
Yes.
And this is a large part of what we do every day. What would you say, if we get our crystal ball out and we talk about what we can see now, what do you generally think in 30, 40 years?
30, 40 years, wow, okay, long term,
You could say 20, modern classics, but I think, are there any particular brands, cars that you think really will stand the test of time, that really will become something that could become classic collectibles?
So, we've spent most of this podcast thus far talking about the confusion. It's a time of transition. It's a time of confusion. It's quite volatile. I do think that some brands you see today will disappear. It's going to be. I think there's going to be a squeezed middle. We've seen this for a long time already, and there's been a lot of consolidation. The Stellantis group has actually hoovered up a lot of those brands, and actually some of the French brands are doing really well. Peugeot, Citroën. I think people are learning how to sort of navigate this new space. I think you'll see brands increasingly leaning on their heritage. I mean, Renault, for instance, they're not part of Stellantis, obviously, but Renault are going to show the 5 electric at the Geneva Motor Show in March. Actually, it's February in 2024. That's a willfully retro car. And it's really interesting. We talked about retro cars in the late 90s. I almost wonder if at times of uncertainty, millennium's coming, millennium bug, there's a lot of kind of looking back, retrospective design then, and I wonder at the moment
of safety, isn't it?
I think some brands, not everyone will, because not everyone has a back catalogue. Renault have an amazing back catalogue and a history of producing interesting, slightly quirky cars. But I've seen the Renault 5. It's absolutely amazing. But it's going to be very, very like the concept car they have shown. And you're going to see people do that. You'll see, I think, the brands which have traded historically on sort of sporting ambition. We already mentioned BMW, Porsche, and they're already doing it. The Taycan is it's a really good car to drive. It's quite good to look at. It's not going to knock your socks off. Will it be a classic in 20 years? I'm not sure. That for me is the interesting thing. I'd love to.
Do you think, out of interest, the sort of Chinese manufacturers that you mentioned before, some of these new brands coming through, do you think any of those might become sort of a future classic with what you've seen already, or is it sort of?
I'm not sure I do at the moment, but the one thing I would say is do not underestimate them. I think
the power in that part of the segment.
Peril. Yeah, because they are coming. They're coming at numbers.
What they've produced already, that looks like they sort of seem to be.
They will. What they do, and what is what we need to watch out for. For sort of legacy manufacturers need to watch out. So they will just iterate really quickly. It wasn't very long ago, 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, we would go to the Shanghai Motor Show or the Beijing Motor Show, and there was almost risible. People would come back and write reports about how they were just cloning Western, and it was quite funny actually.
It was very very funny.
And there's still a bit of that, but you need to understand that's almost in Chinese culture a way of, it's almost a form of flattery. It's not, so you need to get inside the mindset. So to Westernise, that looked a bit risible. Whereas now they're coming with very on-point cars which have amazing technology at prices that undercut Western manufacturers, although not by as much as you might think. So we need to watch out. They are going to come at scale, I think, and a lot of analysts agree that by 2030 they will probably have the bulk of, or 2030, 2040 sort of time frame. They will probably have the bulk of the EV market.
It'll be interesting whether they must, because obviously classics tend to sort of sphere out of the sort of sports car that you make. It very much depends, I think, if they go
into that.
Naturally, you need to get your bulk sale, and traditionally rally cars, sports cars, Formula One, you do this homologation. You'd almost create a car at a loss to be able to sell your brand and thus your main seller. And whether they go into that, or whether, because of we said about the modern trends with technology, they need to do that, because ultimately, if the technology is better, will that sell their car, or will they need to, much like the traditional brands, go into traditional branding and motorsports or racing?
Because you think, apart from Formula E, we're still, it's very early days, and things like rallying, I could well imagine that happening. Well, listen, by 2030, 2035, if rallying is to exist, it will probably have to happen. So, and I'm open-minded about that. I think we need to be, and certainly Car Magazine's perspective has always been to try and be quite progressive. We're not going to stick our head in the sand and say all electric cars are bad. steer clear of them. There is innovation happening. It's very, and I think the brands which will prosper in future will be ones who can just sort of navigate this transition. They will bring with them the likes of BMW, some of the German brands, or the British brands as well. Jaguars and Land Rovers. Jaguars are a very interesting case in point.
They've decided to go.
They've almost been mothballed. It's rather sad to watch Jaguar right now, but they're on the cusp of some sort of reinvention.
They've gone, right, shut up shop. We're going completely innovative.
We're going Bentley really now. Which is, it's amazing, isn't it? When you look around, the sort of vehicles that you guys have, most Jaguars people associate with the kind of vehicles you trade in, and this is a big reinvention for them. All electric, very upmarket,
very modern upmarket, and
they're clever people there as well. I think it won't have that everyday appeal. Think of it when it's stretched down to the X-Type. I think we actually wrote a story about one of the cars you sold. I think last year, the Queen's X-Type.
Yes.
One of the historic cars that caught our eye on Car Magazine. We did a small piece on that, but that was the opposite end. That was the everyday. That was a Ford Mondeo based car. Whereas now they're going completely up there. Let's be interesting to watch this space and see if it works.
Very interesting. I must say, I was over at Lotus, and they've released that sort of really a bit like in the vein of the Lamborghini, the big SUV cars. And Lotus being typically a very much sporty brand, I couldn't get my head around the idea of they're releasing an SUV. I mean, as much as it was very sporty, very much like the Urus look, it was an all-electric people carrier.
Made in China.
Yeah, and you're sort of looking at it, and interestingly, from a brand perspective, they were still very Lotus-like in the way that they were marketing, and very sport-like. Everything was very keen about speed and the Lotus brand, but ultimately, it was an electric SUV.
Weighing probably not far off 3 tons. I don't know the figure off the top of my head, but it's going to be more than 2, nearly 3, I think. And that's the thing that I struggle with. These cars are heavy. Sort of is that better? More.
Well, this is where I think as we go forward, as you say, in this changing period, is that where the big change is going to be? Because ultimately, these cars in this period are incredibly heavy, and as technology evolves, if that weight can be shed, these cars will be tantamount to being useless because they would be too heavy, really, to be.
Some of these early cars, when you're getting a future gazing glasses back on, it'd be interesting to see.
So they are almost like prototypes in production at the moment because of the way in which it moves so quickly. Tesla really put them all on the back foot, and they all had to go very, very quickly. So we're almost driving on the roads a lot of prototypes, because normally they would be feeding these out over a decade period, just slowly generating a change. But actually, like the likes of BMW, other than the i3, suddenly went, oh blimey, we've got to go now.
I think you're making me think a little bit of the circular economy, which some of the manufacturers are looking at, and the likes of Renault are building factories to actually refit their cars and almost take them in after the first owner, the second owner, and actually do some work on them to almost sort of remarket it as not quite a new car, but and that sort of looking, and which I think is the wonderful thing about the classic scene is that obviously that is cherishing, it's looking after cars. There's some stat that I think it's something of the order of 70% of all Porsches ever built are still on the road. I think, and that sort of idea, which to me, true sustainability, because talking about trends in the market, sustainability is the big one for me. Now, whatever your take on electric cars, whether you think they are the solution because it's zero emissions at the tailpipe, or whether you sort of person who starts saying yes, but where does the energy come from, and where does all the raw materials come from? The idea of looking after our products and not anti-BCP culture, just get a new car every 3 years and forget about
As we know, that's exactly the problem. The environmental issue is more about the churn of new for new. We all know that the 40-year-old V8 is far better for the planet than every 2 years getting a new Volkswagen up or something, because that is the essence of keeping something alive. But it will be very interesting to see in coming years whether, because nothing's really started to drip into what I would call the classic market yet. We haven't seen anything much into auctions with regards to electrifications and cars like that.
BMW i8, there must be a few
I don't think it'll be long until they start. We've sold.
I thought the i8.
A few of the i8s.
Yeah, the i8, but they've not really, I'd say, clicked into it yet. There'll be the odd one.
But I don't think it's far away for the i8.
I think that's an iconic looking car.
And that's it's design, sporting focus. You're right. I think the familiar tropes of the kind of cars which enthusiasts or collectors, it's not always sports cars. There are luxury as well, but I think
and also
the BMW is a good example of one.
And also
should become
in collectible cars, the flawed genius is often always picked up. So a car that didn't sell in great numbers or had flaws actually becomes something that
one of the early, like you say, one of the early
Honda E, which is the Honda E was it's a very interesting car. I lived with one of those for about during lockdown. Actually, weirdly, I was locked in with
a Honda E.
And it was that was because for Japanese manufacturers, that's where I still love the plurality that you get in the car world. You get the Japanese manufacturers coming on, just completely surprising you from time to time.
Yeah.
You see Toyota, who for for many years, decades even, they sort of went through a very dull period in the noughties when, they sort of almost forgot they had a sporting pedigree. And then suddenly here they come out of nowhere, the GR Yaris, and I've driven down today actually in a GR86.
Oh,
really
nice,
back to basics, manual.
Fun car.
It's just
fun car to drive.
car.
Yeah, not trying to put too much horsepower into something.
And it's just, that breed sadly is dying. You've got the MX-5 is still here, but it's under a lot of pressure. The ZEV mandate, the crushing sort of pressure of emissions, regulations is getting harder and harder.
I think also with what people want these days is you're seeing more people want sort of SUVs, big cars you sit up nice and high, comfortable cars. I think
do they want them, or is it that they're being fed them?
Well, that's
I don't know.
I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah, because as we all do, we drive lots and lots of cars, and actually that comes back to that comfort thing about driving has become less enjoyable because you can't enjoy it as much. And when you take away that enjoyment, then you do want to go into a big SUV which is more comfortable because you've got no inclination to drive fast.
Cameras and everything.
So actually,
you can't drive fast, can you?
And that again is again modern trends and how people act. Sort of, I wouldn't say I would desire a big car, but when you're not getting any real enjoyment for the car, it's nicer to drive the big one than it is to drive the little one.
The wealthiest people I know in my sort of friends and network, will probably have something like a Range Rover or a Disco, for the day to day, but they'll probably have something fun. And I think that car for purposes, rather than trying to get the car that does everything, I think that's where I think it gets very exciting. The typical car magazine reader, or probably a lot of your customers, I guess, will probably have that sort of
the third car in the house.
And the car for fun is where that's where we still on Car Magazine, and we have it's a very broad church car. It was launched in 1962 as mini and small car owner. That's where it started. So it's always been writing about small cars, but also about exciting cars. And with writers like L.J.K. Setright and so many of the great names who passed through Car Magazine, and the stories which we're still doing to this day. We've taken a Ferrari to the Sahara. We've kind of recreated the 1990s story when we took a Testarossa to the Sahara, and we've done it in the latest issue, the February issue of Car Magazine. And it's going to be part 2 in the March issue. But for us, that's what it's all about. It's about celebrating the exciting car, fascinated and watching and chronicling what's happening with the electric cars. Because there's so much change. It's an amazing time. I feel very privileged to be here with a ringside seat and be able to have a job where I'm trying to make sense of it all. It's intriguing.
Well, we've always said, what's changed in the motor car really? In 100 years, we're still holding a steering wheel. We still have pedals. The engine's the only real change. At some point, these changes had to happen, and as they happen, and as we adopt technology, the ability to innovate is almost been opened. The door's been opened.
And the genie's out of the bottle, and I think we always try and prick the bubble of don't believe everything you're told. So the technological innovation, autonomy, for starters. I was driven in a fully autonomous car a decade ago, literally hands off. We went all round a test track at quite some speed actually. And that was in about 2013, I think it was, 2013.
And imagine
14.
how quick it's gone between.
At Bosch's, it was a Bosch test track in Germany called Boxberg, and it was just amazing, and really blew my mind. Here we are 10 years on, people are still saying, well, it's just round the corner. I don't think it is.
It's there, it's just not.
Well, I
really think skeptical. It's infrastructure problems.
It depends when you talk about autonomous cars, and that's one of the big topics that most manufacturers do talk about. People in their mind immediately go to, it's called level 5, like full robo-taxi. Drive me home from the pub, perfect. And it just won't happen. Where I live, there's no white lines on the road. The roads are crumbling.
Yeah.
It will happen in very
The motorways will be the first point of contact for that, because you can actually control those factors. But that's where I always think, once that happens, which is the level 5, I think that's when the classic car and the sports car then really comes into its own again, because ultimately, and back to that story about the Tesla, they become modes of transports, and they are car, but not cars. Once they become modes of transport, it's a bit like getting in and out of a taxi. That's really handy. It's very useful, perfect. You can go to the pub.
You probably won't even own it.
No.
It'll be a sort of something you rent.
You'll hail. It'll just exactly. Yeah. But then, of course, you'll want something in the garage for the joy of actual driving, which won't be the same. The only question is, will the younger generations follow us along with this, or will they lose that love? And that's probably a lot of down to things like motorsport, being able to keep that.
And I think motorsport, you mentioned social media, it's up to, and we are trying to make sure we're topping up. Depends which which branch of our magazines you're talking about. The physical print magazine, it's still there. Isn't it interesting? All the naysayers a decade ago were going, print's dead. No, it's not. No. It's here and actually doing quite well, and cars ABC circulation figures going up at the moment. But we're reaching so many more people through the website, through the social channels, through YouTube, through Apple News Plus, all these new ways of doing it, reaching our audience. So we're right in the thick of that.
That's brands, that's clever brands, but our Historics do the same. Through this channel, we are using and innovating modern technologies to reach our audience, which then revert to that classical way of picking up and using the print. From our point of view, getting people to come to auctions and actually physically attending real live events. But you have to adapt and adopt and find these people through the modern means, and you find them, and they do want to that traditional way.
But the interesting one is the sort of age question, because my son, I'm teaching him to drive right now, really quite enjoying it. No, I'm fully enjoying it. But I think it's harder. That it's a reasonably wide-held belief that fewer young people are into it. And I think when you look around, and a big barrier is cost. I think there's a story on the BBC News only this week.
£3,000.
£3,000 to insure a car. Well, who can afford that if they're not banked by
Tim,
mum and dad?
I'm 42 and it's costing me £1,000. I can, and that was what I used to have to pay when I was 17.
My premiums has gone up by about 40% to renew next week, actually, to get onto a case of that. But it's scary. So I don't know. It's a very different world, isn't it? Jammed up roads. If you live in an urban environment, you may not need a car. That aspiration to own a car, it probably depends where you live and your circumstance, I guess. But I hope the future generations, will get into it. It's brought me a lot of fun and pleasure over the years, and I hope they do.
So upcoming trends to look out for, if we had to name one?
I think for me the biggest trend, and we've sort of brushed on it already, but I think the sustainability thing is just going to get more and more important. The idea of a circular car, actually making it truly circular, is quite challenging, but we're going to see that. But I think it's going to drive things in all walks of the motoring life, really, down to biofuels, e-fuels coming in.
Well, that's what we're using at Goodwood. Yeah, I was going to say Goodwood, that's
biofuels.
To it, and it's a very clever way of doing it, isn't it? And actually sort of, allowing these cars, so having a pass to carry on, which for me is so important. There are beautiful cars around us here, at Historics. We're in the lockup here. It's amazing to see some of the cars over my shoulder. And to enable them to keep going is fantastic, I think. And the idea of it appreciating and looking after and nurturing the cars and keeping them going for longer is brilliant. I think that's a really big thing. Clearly, sustainability will impact the cars you and I are buying, the new cars we're buying, and the turn to electrification. I think it'll be quite a fragmented future. I don't think there'll be one solution. I don't think that pure electric cars will necessarily,
No, I think
fuel cells, some brand.
As we said, you said earlier, you highlighted, although electric cars have become the norm and they've got this incredible talkability and so on and so forth, the problem still comes to the fact that we all know they're not an environmental solution. They're just a solution to a different problem. The environmental solution hasn't yet been really manufactured. We're still having to create vast amounts of waste and energy usage to create a car, and ultimately that there is a problem for the environment. And if you want to do that, yes, you're quite right, it has to be more renewable.
But I think the concept of ownership, there's a phrase which was very popular about 5 years ago called CASE. It stands for connected, autonomous, shared and electric, and it was the big challenge for the manufacturers, the Germans in particular, were using this phrase CASE. And we've talked about autonomy. For me, I think actually, most new cars, a lot of new cars are virtually autonomous. Radar, cruise control.
They're not far off, let's be honest.
They keep you in your lane. For me, they're stepping stones to full autonomy. I'm a massive sceptic. I think full autonomy is almost a pipe dream. It will be decades.
I wish for it, because I think it would change it. I mean, my wife hates it when I get in the car and I turn on the lane, and I sit there and sit back and sit my feet back. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I don't have to do anything. I'm here. I've got the steering wheel. I need it."
In places, of course, when I say decades, that's for full autonomy. Around where I live, in the middle of nowhere in the Midlands, I think that's a long way off. Connected, well, it's already happening. We talk about the connectivity in cars, but that's actually a way, them communicating to each other. And actually, Waze does that, right?
Yeah.
If you have Waze on your thing, that's telling you, there's an accident here. So, that's to be welcomed. Shared is interesting. I think this idea of ownership, the typical modern car sits around for about 95% of its life being not driven. It's parked up, and clever people.
I think that's a big one, actually. I think that will come in. Even things with like Uber and the way that the modern.
Well, why have 40 cars in a village when 6 would do?
That's a huge mental leap, though. I think that's the sort of
I think that's a long way off, but I think that will.
But it will come from urban living. It will all be, and most of the world is pushing towards urban living, and the urban living will drive that. Anyways, we could talk about this until the cows come home, and I hope you've enjoyed it. It's a great insight, but before we let you leave, we're going to ask every new guest on our new reformed Historics Refuel podcast a few questions.
Okay.
Just interesting question about yourself, and just see what you say to this. So this question, I'm sure you've been asked 100 times, being a journalist, a motoring journalist. What was your first car?
Oh, my first car. My first car I bought for £1.
£1?
And it was it was a Y-Reg, so that's 1982-ish. Renault 5 GTL. It was a Mark 1 Mark 1 Renault 5, and it was unripe tomato red. And I bought it for £1 because I bought it off my sister. And
there's the story though. I bought a pair. Yeah, that'll be forever.
And it was called Paddy, and it was brilliant. It lasted about 3 years until I blew the head gasket, and it was so expensive to repair. I had to trade it in. But Renault 5, it was lovely.
What do you think about that though? Divide that pound by 3 years. That's incredibly.
I know, 33p, yeah. And of course, they're going to be launching the Renault 5 Geneva Motor Show, as we mentioned earlier. So it's come full circle.
I can see yourself on the list.
I can see a story coming.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, second question, and this is always a difficult one because we get asked this all the time, and it's very difficult to really sit upon it. Dream car, and it can be modern or classic. So it could be something came out last week. It could be something you remember from the '60s. What would be your dream car?
I quite often give different answers when I get asked.
Me too.
We do get asked it a lot, but I'm going to say today, bear in mind where I am as well, but I would probably, if money were no object, for the Ferrari 288 GTO. And the reason why, that was a poster on my wall for many years when I was younger. I think when we moved house, sadly it got thrown out. I was a bit sad about that. But it was one of the sort of zenith really of those Ferrari specials. It was the one that started it all. The F40, a lot of people talk about the F40. For me, I almost go for the one before.
Yeah, see, I was a little bit later, and it was always the F40 or the Lamborghini Countach. Everyone had one of those posters. Yeah. It'd be interesting to know if you poll everyone, what car poster did you have on your wall? There were 4 or 5, I would think, that really got most of those trumped out. That or a poster of Pamela Anderson at my age. So it's either or those two. Okay, so best road trip.
Road trip. I'm in a very lucky position where we get to do quite a lot of driving in interesting cars for work, and that sort of continues. But the one that sticks in my mind, if you put me on the spot, I'm going to say we do a test every year called Sports Car Giant Test in Car Magazine, and it was in around 20. Goodness, what year did it come out? I'm going to say it was around about 2011, 2012 when we went to the Route Napoleon. We spent basically a week in the south of France driving all the year's best sports cars, and I think to this day it's probably one of the highlights of my career because we had a 458 Italia Ferrari. We had what else do we have there? We had a GT2 911, a Lotus Elise. We had all the best cars of the year, so it's about 6 of them with the road testers on Car Magazine, who are a great bunch. They're very talented. They really understand cars. They're just like being able to immerse yourself, and on roads like that with weather like that. And we went up Mont Ventoux at dawn. Went to the top of Ventoux to get the sunrise, and I just pinched myself moments. Really,
fantastic. Yeah. I get to drive an E-Type round Iver. It's the best I get.
but you can do that in any car. That's where the joy of going off and doing the North Coast 500 or going to Wales. The roads around Snowdonia we often go to, and I think. Long may that continue. I really hope, and it doesn't have to be in a fast car.
It doesn't at all.
And that's where the joy of just getting in an interesting car on interesting roads. We're still able to do it, and long may that continue.
And one final question: what's your favourite song to drive to? Have you got a track that you would love to drive to always?
Putting me on the spot now.
And this could be embarrassing, though. That's why I like this question.
The honest answer is I don't. I have I quite often have 6 music on. I should be saying the corporate answer because Bauer Media owns a lot of radio stations, so it's absolute radio all the way. But I quite often have 6 music on, and I'm an indie kid at heart, so sort of
indie music.
Something by The Cure or something like that. I don't know. But yes, I think for me it's about enjoying the car. And the company you're with and the roads you're on. Really.
No, very, very good. Okay, let's wrap this up. Thank you both. Remember, if you've enjoyed this, do check out the Historics YouTube channel, which this will be on. The Haggerty website for car valuations. They're our insurance partners, and they could help you out possibly. Like and subscribe, and do comment. Let us know what you think of it. Let us know your songs that you like to drive to. And remember that all of our lots from our current auction are on the Historics website. You can click there now, and we're starting to consign for our March auction. You'll see a number of cars hosted on there, and also details on how you can get a free valuation from one of our chaps in the office, should you wish. Now, if you want to follow us on socials, I'm at Matthew Priddy, we're at Historics.
I'm Daniel Godin at Historics.
And Tim, give us a couple of your own or some of the...
at Tim Pollard Cars on Instagram and Twitter.
There you go.
And probably other ones as well. And at Car Magazine and at Parker's Cars.
Just a few.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this, and do stay tuned next time when I'll be with Vicky and Tom at the next auction venue. Thank you very much, and see you for now.